jump in.
All right. Sounds
Okay.
perfect.
Welcome to the Pediatric Epilepsy Podcast, a place to have open conversations with warrior parents and the country's most notable experts about one of the most devastating neurological diseases, the importance of urgency, mental health, a place to share positive stories and even heart-wrenching ones to inform, invite, and inspire. Today's episode is a special edition of Beyond the Diagnosis, a program dedicated to specifically helping parents learn what to expect along every season of the journey after a diagnosis of pediatric epilepsy. I'm Christy Grease with my co-host Dario Herrera, and we're so honored to have our medical advisory board member and one of the country's most notable and respected pediatric epileptologists, Dr. Mary Z. Ponce. Welcome.
Welcome.
And today, welcome, Dr. Z. We're always so glad to have you on here to help us facilitate these important conversations. And today's guest is Eileen Devine. We're so honored to have her here. Eileen is not only a licensed clinical social worker, but she, with over 20 years of experience in a clinical treatment of her patients, which includes adults and children, but she's also a parent of a teenager who is medically complex as well. And we believe that really gives her a unique perspective in this conversation because she can come to it with a perspective of not only a parent, but as a medical professional as well. And in that, what we felt was very interesting about her work is that she not only focuses on the behavioral aspects of the patients that she works with, but she really handles it from a brain perspective. And that is something that we feel is important to dive into today. And so welcome, Eileen, to this conversation.
Thank you so
We're so
much.
honored to have you.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Can you tell us, just jump in and start telling us a little bit about your work with families and what you notice about the relationship between the journey of epilepsy and its effect on families, particularly from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I've been a clinical social worker for 20 years, but I was doing something very different in the clinical world till about 13 years ago. My daughter Maya is 14 now, and because I have a son who's only 15 months older than her, so pretty close in chronological age, we noticed right away that her development was not typical. And to make a very long story short, we started seeing that through challenging behaviors shortly after that. So ages 2, 3, and 4, those are challenging ages anyways on a good day. But these were challenges that we knew were not typical. So that didn't settle well with me. I felt like every information that I was getting was like, this is just kind of the way it is based on her diagnosis and her challenges. And I thought, as a clinical social worker, my husband then was in education, we're like, there's got to be more to this than that. There's got to be room for us to actually thrive in this parenting experience rather than just accept it as it is and move into this mode of surviving. So that led me on a long quest to figure out what that was. And when I started to learn about her brain and how it works so differently than her neurotypical brother, I realized she needs something very different from me as a parent than he does. And so it wasn't about working harder. I was already working really, really hard, as many of the parents listening are, I'm sure. It was about really taking all that energy and just putting it into a different place, parenting her differently. And so from there, I thought, who's teaching parents this? It was so impactful to us. I thought there's got to be some way that I can begin to share this information with parents and give them hope and show them that there's more hope than any of us are usually led to believe. So I changed my clinical focus and I've been doing this work ever since then. So the work that I do specifically is supporting parents, and I work with them to help them understand what I call two sides of the coin of this parenting journey. So all the parents I work with have kids whose brains have been changed for one reason or another, lots of different reasons that could be. And all of their children have very, very challenging and complex behaviors. And so we work on understanding, starting from the perspective, well, what does the brain do for us every day? What does it do for you, for me? And if their brain has been impacted, their child's brain, how might that look different in the way that they navigate the world, the way they experience the world? So we focus a lot on that because then they know, oh, this is what my child needs, accommodations to help them settle. But the other side of the coin of this, and I talk to parents about these two sides of the coin, at least 50% of the work that I do with parents is focusing on their experience as well. Because they can have all the information in the world about how their child's brain works, but they will come to a stopping place where they will, I think, come up against some of the strong emotions, mental health, transitions, like what does this mean now to know what my child actually needs? There's some relief in that, but there's also grief in that. So really figuring out how to gently move through that emotional experience so that they can show up in the way that they desperately want to, but the way that their child needs them to as well. So that's the other piece of the work that I do with them.
Wow, that was so eloquently said. And I'm just, as a parent myself, it just gets me thinking about the fact that you said the parent experience. And that's not really talked about a lot through this journey. We're really focused so much on the child and how do parents, what are some of the common experiences or issues that parents are facing when you bring that to them and you just even present them with that thought.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, as a parent, I think we can all understand when something is happening with our kids that is making life difficult for them, but also for us and the rest of our family, we want to go after the solution that's going to help our child. Like that is our sole focus. We can get tunnel vision about it. And sometimes I joke with the parents that I work with that that's kind of how I hook them. Because that's what they are coming to me for. Rarely are they coming to me saying, I need support. I'm having a hard time. It's always my child is struggling. I desperately need some help in understanding how to support them better. So we do that, but then they inevitably find like, okay, this part of this equation depends on my well-being and my health. And I don't talk with parents about self-care. I think there's a very understandable negative connotation with that because of the way the general population, popular culture talks about self-care, but we do talk about resiliency and what that means from a nervous system perspective, what our nervous system does for us, just as people walking this earth, what it means to have a child who has a fragile nervous system and needs copious amounts of regulated support from us, because that's really that resilience building is what's going to help them stay in that place of thriving. So some of the things that I see that breaks down that resiliency and chips away at it is things like discarding the experience for what it is. So feeling as though they don't have permission to acknowledge just how hard this is. It's like, I'm doing the best I can because, man, this is hard. It is as hard as you think it is. That's what I say to parents all the time. And acknowledging that and really being able to settle into that, soldiering on through. So if I could just get through this, or so-and-so would be doing better than me at this, or look at this parent over here, they have it harder than me. And, this comparative suffering and they're doing okay. Why am I complaining? Why am I getting down by this smaller, what they evaluate as a smaller challenge in their own life? And that just chips away at your resilience. So there's all kinds of things like that, not being able to really sit with emotion. I mean, lots of people in our world have a difficulty connecting to their emotions, but when you're in this survival state, it's going to be too vulnerable. It's going to be too risky to be able to just settle in with, how am I feeling about this? Because what comes up many times is, I have grief over what my parenting experience is compared to what I thought it would be. I'm really angry and upset that this happened to me and my family. I feel bad that I can't give my other kids the attention that I feel they need, like on and on and on, right? And so being able to sit with that and gently move through it versus just shoving it off to the side, pretending it's not there, right? It never goes away. That just gives it more power, it just snowballs. It takes more control over your life. But none of that is recognized when you're in the thick of it. So it's really about helping them slow down, take a deep breath, understand what's happening with them truly, and how they can start to heal and build their resilience, right? Day by day by day, so that they can then, again, move from that place of survival into thriving. It sounds really complicated, but
no, it's helpful to break it down this way. And you realize we're not living in a vacuum. Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
Well, and that's okay. I wanted to ask Dr. Z a question, or do you want to make a comment first, Dr. Z?
I want to make a comment because oftentimes, I'm not sure if I did it with you, Christy, or not, but parents have to grieve the loss of a normal child and normal parenting. And my background is in nursing before I became a physician. And in nursing school, we read the book Elizabeth Kubler-Ross about the stages of death and dying.
Death and dying, yeah.
And it's very profound. And I found this with my own parents when they were dying and eventually died. And I find it helpful to talk to parents about, you are going through a really difficult stage. And this calls for extraordinary parenting skills, not things that are asked of most parents. And I do talk about self-care for parents, because if you are not in a well state of being, you will eventually lose your ability to adequately take care of your child. But talking about the stages of death and dying, grieving the loss of a normal child, and what you said, Eileen, really struck with me. Parents go through those different stages at different times, and they often go back. So there is denial, there's denial, there is anger, there is bargaining. Well, if I only do this, then this will happen. And then eventually reconciliation. And parents who are able to manage to go through those steps successfully often stay together. Unfortunately, we know that parents of children with special needs, the divorce rate is over 80%. I mean, it's hard enough to be married, let alone have children, let alone have a child or children with special needs, that it can be so overwhelming. And then you have to do battle with the insurance companies who may or may not decide to cover medications or hospitalizations. So you get into financial difficulties. And then schools who will often try to lump children together into a special needs classroom where the needs are very, very different. And so you're doing battle on so many different fronts. It's exhausting. I don't know how parents do it. I don't.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Dr. Z, you've seen this over a 40-year career, and your background is in nursing. And I guess the question I want to ask you was, do parents, are they more inclined to give themselves permission to talk about this stuff than when you first started? Or do you see the same kind of difficulty in admitting to their own needs and acknowledging their own needs and acknowledging their own pain or grief or whatever stage it's in? I wonder how that kind of has changed or shifted, or if it has, through the arc of your career.
Well, I would say parents come with different agendas and with different backgrounds. So it's often hard to predict. Some are more open to discussing aspects of the challenges they faced as a parent, and others are very more guarded. And the medical profession right now isn't helping, or the business of medicine isn't helping. Let me put it that way. When I first started in medicine 40 years ago, we could actually have a long visit and you wouldn't be dinged for the time you spent for the patient, and you wouldn't be judged on what we call RVUs, or relative value units, which is how we're paid in the medical profession. And unfortunately, especially young physicians who don't feel that they have a lot of voice or power or control in their practice are often relegated to a certain amount of time. So we may be so focused on dealing with the medical issues that we don't even get to the psychosocial, financial, and other issues, which is why I have always advocated. I know I've been a pain in the rear to a lot of administrations, but you have to have,
thank goodness. You were.
I can deal with the medical issues in a nanosecond. Typically, I know exactly where I want to go with a parent, but it's all the other issues that require a multidisciplinary clinic. For example, Eileen, I couldn't function without a social worker. I would be out in the woods wandering, or with a psychologist, or pharmacists are helpful. My nursing staff and advanced practice providers are invaluable. There's just so many issues that a family understandably brings to the table when they have a child or adolescent with special needs, that it's overwhelming to them. And I might say it's overwhelming to the provider, because we can't, we don't have the time. Many of us have the interest, we have the passion, but we don't have the time. And that's why I submit to you, that's why the burnout rate among child neurologists is so high, because we know we're failing parents because we can't address all these issues that are so important.
The constraints of the system.
It's awful. That's all I gotta say. We'll keep trying, however.
You know, you mentioned couples and the difficulties they experience, especially with the grief experience. And I wanted to just say one thing about that, and because it comes up so frequently when I'm working with couples, where as they talk to me about their experience and what's happening, I'm always listening for themes of grief kind of underneath that, because I feel like 99.9% of the time it's there. But oftentimes it presents behaviorally for them in two very different ways, right? Through fear, through anger, resentment, whatever it might be. And so in that moment where they actually need each other in connection the most, they're at odds because they feel like they are in two completely different experiences, when that's not the case. And oftentimes, if we can frame it around grief and what is that and how do we experience it as individuals, they can come together and see like, oh, okay, you're suffering too in the same way I am. It just looks different for each of us, how we're processing and living it out. And that can be really powerful for folks, for that reframing.
That's an excellent, excellent point, Eileen, because and parents, I think, do experience it in so many different ways. And for the primary care provider in the home, which is often the mother, increasingly the fathers are more and more involved, but they will experience it very, very differently because they live it. They're faced with it day by day. Often find, and I'm not trying to be prejudicial at all, but fathers or providers who work outside the home have a longer span of denial. They're able to deny a little bit more. But for the person who is the primary care provider in the home, you are faced with those challenges every single day. You can't really deny. You may have anger, you may have resentment, you may bargain with certain things, but you're living it in and out every single day. I don't know how parents do it. And particularly the primary, I don't know how they do it. Those are extraordinarily resilient people who can do it through the years. I would hope that I would respond in that way, but I have never been faced with challenges like that.
I really resonate with what you said, because, you know, we went through that experience with my son. You know, my son was diagnosed with autism at a very young age. And thankfully, you know, his mom was very acutely in tune with him. And I didn't see it. And in some ways I was in denial about it, but, you know, we weren't together at the time, and I was out of the home, and she got to deal with it and saw the stimming and saw the blank stare and saw some of those things. And she got to deal with it on the front line. And I was saying, well, he'll grow out of it. You know, it's just a phase, or, you know, I don't think you can diagnose this early. Yeah, and I came up with a bunch of different, you know, kind of denial phrases that reflected what I was feeling inside. But she was on the front line every day, experiencing it every day. So, you know, thankfully, you know, she was very motivated and in tune with him, and didn't take no for an answer, and got the diagnosis and got him help. And he's, you know, doing fantastic now. But I love that point that you made, because it is true. There are different phases, and the proximity to the child and the time spent with the child certainly is a factor, you know. And I wanted to ask, you know, Eileen, so, you know, part of what Beyond the Diagnosis is to help parents figure out what to expect, right?
Mhm.
I think we've talked about that a little bit, the grief, the different stages, the almost shame, if you will, the guilt, some of those things that I think are recurring themes when we have these conversations. So how do they cope? Like what tools, like what,
Yeah.
and Christy and I've had this conversation a lot, because it's not until recently that Christy's opened up about her own PTSD and her own
Yes.
kind of trauma and her own mental health challenges and how they affected, big spans of her life.
Yeah.
And she's been dealing with this for a long time, and is a founder of Mickey's Miracles,
Yes.
So,
Yep.
so for the parent at home who's listening and wants to understand, like, how do I cope with this, and how do I support my child, and how do I, support myself so that I can support my child? What's the answer to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's, in my mind, at least, and in my experience, there's a few overarching like big themes, and then the actual implementation of those are going to look different for people depending on their experience. But I think the first piece is matching the intensity of your resilience building activities with the intensity of your caregiving and parent experience. Which with some parents who are especially 24/7 care, really hypervigilance because of seizures or whatever it might be, they're like, oh my goodness, how will I ever do that? And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying you get there overnight. It's not like you decide to do and then it happens. It's a process that comes to my second point, is made so much easier with support. One of the things that I say to parents is we all have to have connection. It's a biological imperative. And when I mean connection, I mean places and spaces where we are truly seen and heard, like that feeling of being in the company of someone who's like, oh, I get it. Or if I don't get it, I am with you. Like I am completely present here. It's so rare to find for a lot of people. We have to have that, and to choose your support wisely. There's lots of spaces now, like online and that sort of thing, that give us the opportunity for connection, which is wonderful. There's also spaces where the folks who are in charge of facilitating those conversations or whatever it might be are really burnt out themselves. They are experiencing compassion fatigue, and it is a contagious syndrome. That's the way I encourage parents to think about it. If you are in an environment where everyone is burnt out, it's always just venting, and there's nothing about how can we help you get to a better place? I see you and I hear you and I want to help you move through this. You will only come out of that situation even more burnt out, right? Even more fatigued. So to choose your care wisely. And then the third thing is really understanding and learning about what it means to have a strong, stable nervous system, and how that's connected to building your resiliency every day. There are really small things that people can do to build their resilience every day in moments a day. And I think, at least for me, sometimes with the parents that I'm working with, they're like, that's it? Like, you're telling me that's going to make a difference? I'm like, well, why don't we try it? It's not going to make you worse off, right, than you are now. And if that just beginning, just giving some faith to that idea that will make a difference, and then over time feeling your nervous system settle, feeling that more stable place, healing that nervous system so that you can again show up in your parenting experience, everything that it brings, the intensity that it brings, and still thrive within it, right? Which is unimaginable for some of the parents that I work with when we begin our work. So again, doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith to believe that those things are actually going to make a difference. But I see it time and time again, right? We have lots of research that shows us that's true too. So
what type of activities are you thinking of? Like, meditate? I mean, is there something that we may not have heard about that you've tried?
My guess is that you've heard a lot of them. I'll tell you what, kind of in rank order. In terms of how I see.
This is good. I'm gonna take notes.
Now we're
sure.
getting to the nitty-gritty. Let me get my pen.
This is recorded, but I'm gonna write this stuff down.
These aren't just my ideas and my opinions. This is what research shows us, right? So moving your body, that is the number one way to reset your nervous system and build it to be stronger. So the way I visualize it is that the stress accumulating throughout my day is just settling in my nervous system, and it's just staying there. And it's just going to sit and build until I literally work it out, right? That's just a really good visual for me. It doesn't have to be sweat and hard breathing. It can be stretching in the morning. It can be going for a walk. It can be yoga. It can be gentle, light movement, whatever that might be, but moving your body. The second one is breath work. It is completely underestimated in terms of how it down regulates your nervous system and provides you with stability. You can do that in moments a day. We could be doing it here in this conversation and none of us would know, right? You don't have to take a time out, although if you can, amazing, wonderful. But you can do that in moments a day when you start to feel yourself get unsettled, right? Get dysregulated. The other piece is connection with other people. We talk a lot about the power of co-regulation, how we all need co-regulation, nervous systems interacting with one another. It's a very complex topic, but like really amazing when you can teach it to parents and help them understand the power of it. What it requires is for us to get co-regulated support from another regulated person so that we can then provide it to other people like our child, right? Who's prone to dysregulation, who has a very fragile nervous system. That's going to happen anyways. Our dysregulated, fragile child is going to need us in this regulated state. If we don't have our own co-regulated needs met, we're not going to be able to be that regulated buffer for them, which is a big bummer, right? It's like parents desperately want to be, but they're triggering, not by any fault of their own. It's that they're depleted. They need to heal. They need to build their resilience. So those are just a few. There's a really wonderful book called Unlocking the Stress Cycle. It's called Burnout, Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And it has lots of really good, easy to implement resilience building activities within it. If you're interested in checking that out.
Well, you just gave me this aha moment, and it kind of brought in everything from what Dr. Z was talking about. I actually, my final class at USC was a death and dying class, and we read Kubler-Ross's book. And I'm just thinking about how this whole experience, 10 years in the epilepsy journey, has been a cycle for me as well. And I didn't realize that when I went through this process, I didn't put anything out into the world. I didn't put anything out on social media. It was such a different world then. I mean, Facebook was out there, but I was just, all my energy was in saving my daughter's life. I just had something inside of me saying, my daughter's going to die and I have to do something to save her life. I can't explain it. And when I met Dr. Z, she was the first person that acknowledged me and said, basically what I heard her say was, you're not crazy. And every time I was standing in front of a white coat prior to that, it was like, they just really didn't take what I said and with any sense of urgency. And that made me go a little mad in the sense that, oh, no, like, we're going to keep going. And I always needed to know that there was going to be, like, if this didn't work out, because I knew that each drug protocol she was on, I felt in my soul wasn't going to work. And so when I finally got to Dr. Z and she said, she needs to be in here immediately, it was like, I finally had somebody that was hearing me.
Yes, validation. Yeah,
exactly. And I went through that process. Dr. Z, you did tell me, your daughter will never be normal, and she told me things and I did kind of experience this where I almost had to accept my daughter, what my vision of our life, my vision for my daughter was dying. And yet what's been replaced with is so much bigger and so much better and more amazing than I could have ever imagined. But in all of this, what I'm having this realization right now was me starting Mickey's Miracles, was me reconnecting and making purpose of almost losing my daughter.
Yes.
And reconnecting with other people and giving them the opportunity to have some sense of connection, because I was in isolation and felt so alone through this whole process getting to my daughter's brain surgery.
Yeah.
And that's just this moment I'm having realizing that I needed that too. And
Yeah.
it's not this linear journey. It's very up and down, and you just experience the death and dying process, I think, multiple times, you know, whether it's the relationship between the siblings or just this, you know, weekend we've been traveling, and my son asked if our oldest son asked if Michaela had, was disabled, there was a disabled placard at the airport, if we should sit there. And, sometimes we just don't know what to say. And I think the most powerful thing I'm taking away, besides so many things that you've shared today, was when you just said, giving people permission, just giving them this permission to share and be, and not trying to solve any of necessarily, there's nothing to solve in many
That's right.
cases.
That's right. That's right. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you went through that. And what you describe is true trauma. I mean, we've talked about the schools, we've talked about the medical system. Parents are traumatized by their parenting experience for all kinds of reasons, and then they experience even more trauma by systems on top of that. And again, looking at the intensity of what you've experienced and matching that with the intensity of your recovery, really, that's what it is, right? And it's an ongoing process. Once parents realize that, it's like, whoo, okay, I better get on it. How do I do it? Who's going to help me? But now I at least understand I need to. The other thing that, Brene Brown, who you might be familiar with, she's got a lot of work out there. I love her. She talks a lot about the grief process. And we haven't even talked about disenfranchised grief, right? It not being recognized by society, not having a way to mourn, having it be repeated loss that nobody understands or acknowledges, right? But she talks about grief as being the loss of what will never be, feeling lost, feeling disoriented, and longing for things, sometimes things that you don't even know you cared about until you recognize that they are not there. They're not going to be present, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness, like I'm getting goosebumps because that is the experience of all the parents that I work with. And you've just described that as well, right? She describes it as this wave that will rush over you before you even know what's happened and pull you underwater so quickly that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm drowning, what's happening, right? Which is also what you describe all these years later, right? It can still happen to us. And so it happens. And so what do we do when it happens? We recognize this is happening. And this is why, and it's so appropriate for what I'm going through. And how can I be gentle with myself and move through it, rather than being like, I'm not feeling this, I want to get away from it, offloading it onto other people,
Exactly.
trying to escape or deny it, whatever it might be, whatever way we usually cope with it. So, yeah.
Well, and you're teaching the
what
kids.
Happens. Sorry,
Go ahead.
Kristen.
I was just
No,
going to
please.
say, just by us acknowledging it and having these moments of, me personally being a recovering perfectionist, it not looking perfect, it not being okay, it's a hot mess. Acknowledging that you're teaching, I know I'm teaching my kids in that moment how to deal with it, even if it's not pretty. I mean, because so much of it isn't. I think we don't recognize just so much of what you've said is about energy and how energetically the kids are, feeding off of us. But if we don't have anything there to give, and the opposite is true, if we're filling up, that is giving them something.
Yes. Yeah.
The question I was going to ask, what happens in the brain when a parent gives themselves permission to understand that this is normal for what the situation is? Because I feel like part of, if you're in denial, there's something else happening. But if you're acknowledging how difficult this is and that we're feeling is completely normal, that's a different reaction too. And I wonder what, those perspectives kind of drive in terms of thought and feeling and being able to process, emotions and in a way that's, not destructive and maybe even healthy.
Yeah, well, we know, right, that the mental health aspect has an impact on our complete physical overall well-being. I mean, we see that through lab results, we see that through symptoms, physical symptoms, all of that kind of stuff. The brain, being a physical part of our body, right, is impacted in that as well. When I talk to parents about how their child's brain might work differently under stress because they have a small window of tolerance because of their brain-based differences, parents sometimes are like, oh, that's happened to me too. Like back in the day, I had this wide window of tolerance and now it's so narrow that any small thing kind of throws me off. That's a brain thing, right? That's not about like, oh, I'm just a different person. I'm a pessimist and I see the glass as half empty and I'm kind of got this chip on my shoulder. It's about your brain has been changed from the stress that has gone unaddressed, right? And that can look like depression, that can look like anxiety. I tell parents depression and anxiety, which we're most familiar with, I think because it's talked about the most in society, are your body's way of telling you there's stockpiles of pain and hurt here that need to be addressed. Like it's not resolved. I need some attention. I need to start diving into this and gently working through it, right? But such a vulnerable place for so many parents to be when they have survived in survival mode for years, for decades, right? It's like, oh my goodness, if I slow down and actually sit with this full experience for what it is, will I get swallowed up by it? Exactly. Like literally, will I survive it, right? Which again comes back to community, connection, support, somebody to kind of pull you back out and say, you are surviving it, you're doing okay. The other thing that the research shows that I think is really impactful, I think about this a lot, is that you cannot dim the darkness without also dimming the joy, right? And that's a lot of Brene Brown's research too. So I think about that too, like we deny the pain and all the hard things because we literally can't tolerate it. Well, that means that we are doing the same to the joy and the light in our life too. They can't be separated. They're not mutually exclusive. So, things like that, I think, help at least the parents that I work with to start really wrapping their brain around what does this mean for me personally? And why do I now need to invest as much energy as I can in my own healing, as much as I'm trying to go after what's helping for my child? I am an equal part of this equation, if not more, right? If not more of an impact.
What I've found is that if parents are in this, I understand, like some parents, they're so busy with just helping their child survive. They go from one hospitalization to another, to the emergency room for, let's say, status epilepticus, prolonged seizure, to another illness, that it's impossible for them to get out of that survival mode. And yet what I see with parents who don't get out of the survival mode is they develop sometimes resentment, but more oftentimes just complete burnout, depression, and being unable to see the joy in anything. And I'm not blaming here. I'm just saying it's just completely overwhelming and they're depleted. And on top of that, then we have insurance companies that refuse to pay for the necessary mental health services that not only the care providers need, but oftentimes the siblings. And they'll go say, well, I just can't engage in this because it's going to put me further in debt, or it's just one more thing I have to do in my day. So one of my questions would be, how do you help parents incorporate it into part of their day when they're already feeling overwhelmed, just practically? Because I think that's what parents need to know. How can I practically do this without losing my mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would go back to helping them understand that what I think of as small drops in the bucket really do make a difference, and that's not the final destination for our work together. It's not the final goal, but it's a starting point. And just beginning is such a monumental step for some parents, like the ones that you describe in that situation. Them understanding, okay, I need to take the first step and begin, like, yes, that's great. And then taking that first step of things like, can I ask somebody for help who I've never asked for help because I haven't felt permission to do that, but if I asked them, they'd probably help, things like that. Do I make my needs known so I can go for that 10-minute walk? And again, that's not the only thing that's going to get them to a place of wellness, but really beginning to build their confidence that these small things are possible, and then moving from there. And community. I mean, I keep coming back to community.
Yeah, and that's where COVID-19 really, I think, did put a damper on families. just in general, but certainly on
Mhm.
families of children with special need, is we were in isolation for 2 years. And to ask a neighbor to, or a friend to watch your
Yes.
child for 10 minutes became an impossibility. And
Yes.
even now, we're still in this. I mean, COVID is still around. We know that.
Yes.
Flu, influenza, RSV. But what I have learned in the past 2 years is how important connection is, how I miss personal touch, face-to-face
Mhm.
contact, and to help parents understand that you can ask somebody to come over, take a friend, a safe person, somebody you consider safe, or from your church or in your neighborhood, to come over for 10 minutes so you can get out for a walk, get some fresh air. That's amazingly rejuvenating.
Yes.
And it is a baby step. And the way you described it, by taking baby steps, pretty soon you've walked across the room if you
Yep.
take baby steps.
That's right.
I'd like to provide some context to that question, or the response to the question, because you're right. Like, a parent is overwhelmed. A parent needs to give themselves permission to spend time away from providing care. And I wonder, Eileen, if you would walk us through like a short breath exercise, for example, that you might do with a parent or a family to kind of put that in perspective, because I think it's not easy, because I don't want to minimize it, but it's a tendency to be in the overwhelm and to say, I can't create a space for this, or I can't create a space for that because of the overwhelm. So I wonder if you can model for us, a moment of breathing that might be effective.
No, I just felt myself. As simple as that. No, it can be. There's lots of course, free apps out there that walk you through different breathing exercises that are of seconds into minutes, into 30 minutes, all different lengths. I would encourage folks, if that is what you're drawn to definitely seek that out. And prayerful meditation. I mean, it's all along those same lines. But what I think, if I can, the way that I would answer that is, there are things that what you describe is the process of becoming dysregulated, right? Our nervous system being out of balance. We've seen it with our kids, right? We know what that looks like. And they're fragile, so it happens frequently. It can happen over small things, right? But it happens to us too. And so if we know what causes individuals, not just us personally, but individuals to become dysregulated, and then put that within the context of this parenting experience, that can help parents understand, this is the best place for me to start. So maybe breath work isn't what it is for a particular parent, but when we talk about what thoughts are on repeat and we go through it and I have them journaling is wonderful. Some parents don't even realize that they have these negative, catastrophic, whatever it might be, thoughts on repeat until they start doing the exercise of journaling and writing it down. Having mantras. So for example, if getting to breath work is too vulnerable for your system, if that's not what helps you kind of feel settled, is there a person that brings you a level of settledness that you can visualize in that moment, that really hard moment, whatever that looks like? Is there a place that you can visualize during that really hard moment that can have the same effect as breath work, right? Is there a mantra? So this is as hard as I think it is. She would do better if she could. I am resilient and this moment will pass. I mean, there's all kinds of mantras, right? Stay soft. That's one of mine. When my daughter is having a hard time, I'm like, stay soft. That's facial expression, body language, tone of voice, right? All of these wonderful mantras that can help us settle. And then the last thing I'll say about what might help parents listening in terms of those pieces, if those resonate with you, also being mindful of what I call future tripping. We will get dysregulated very, very quickly if in a hard moment we start saying, oh my gosh, if this now, what about tonight? What about tomorrow? What about next week? What about 10 years from now? Right? There's nothing we can do about all of that. The best thing that we can do is stay regulated in this moment. What is that going to be? That future tripping and getting it, reining that in. So that can be with journaling, that can be with mantras, that can be with breath work. So it really, I wanted to expand those options for folks because breath work may not be it for somebody, but maybe some of those other options would be. There's lots of different things that you can do that have the same impact.
what are some of the specific apps? I'm going to be really concrete.
Oh, now you're testing me.
Only because parents will say, well, that's fine and dandy. I don't know how to go there.
Yeah. Oh, there's one called Calm. I know that's one that I've used a
Okay.
lot. I would encourage folks just to Google it. I mean, you'll get a whole list of them, and
right.
don't pay for it.
Okay, that
Right? There's lots of free ones out there. So
yeah, there are. I just wanted to be able to help parents who may not be as familiar with phones like me. Well, I'm pretty good at an iPhone now. I have young daughters who can teach me these things.
Calm has we've done that with our kids to go to bed for many years. And it's actually taught them how to meditate. And so I'll see even Michaela does this. She'll get fired up and then she'll just go and just like breathe, like they do it naturally. It's really so cool to watch them. Calm is a great app. We love it as a family and listen to it quite often. But I know breath work. For me, I started breath work in this past July at a retreat. And I think there's so many different levels of it, but I just didn't realize how much emotion is in, there was a lot of emotion and pain inside of me that until I did this breath work, it wasn't released. And I was just really surprised. And it went back to what you said about us holding that in. And I think, and I completely agree with what you said about, when you're in overwhelm, you're really worried that it's just going to be an explosion. And I think the other thing that I wanted to mention is that everything that we're talking about, one thing I wanted to say was that this has really been geared towards caretakers, families who have medically complex children. But I also want to offer everything that you've mentioned earlier can be an offering for somebody who is of support to a family or a caretaker. So, hey, do you want to take can we watch the kids tonight so you guys can go out for a date night? Or how about you bring the kids over so we can watch them and you can go for your walk, or let's go for a walk and bring the kids. There's a lot of things that we can do as a community, as a world, as a society, and as friends and family to help the caretakers give themselves permit to, sometimes we have to teach people how to allow us to give to them and help people understand that when you don't allow, and I'm telling this to myself too, as I share it, is when you allow people to help you, you're giving them a gift and they want to share and support and help bring you. It's painful for people to watch you walk this journey alone or in isolation. And I think everything you share today could be something that could be gently offered to a family that's going through something like this. So I think it's been helpful to look at it from not only a parent's perspective listening in, but also somebody who may just want to help another family that's, grieving or in having a difficult time.
I think for the most part, people who are within your community would like to help, because I see the good in people. I've always been, as my husband says, I'm a Pollyanna. Well, I'd much rather be a Pollyanna than a down in the mouth person. But when you reach out, you'll be amazed at how open people are to helping. Communities are really important. And I think some families don't know how to reach out or are afraid of what the reaction will be. And yet I find among our neighbors and our community that people would like to help, they just don't know how. And if you open up to them, they'll reciprocate.
Yep, I would agree.
Well, this has been an amazing episode. In fact, I want to get the recording right away, Dario, so that I can listen back. I've learned so much, so grateful for both of you being on here and just supporting our warrior families in the fight. And it really feels like that when you're in it. It feels like a battle. And I think everything that you've shared today really allows people to know how to just deal with it, just even a day at a time, hour at a time, minute at a time. And I think that's the most important thing, is that we
Right.
can't deny what we're going through, but if we can build our resiliency, amazing things can come out of it. And I know that because we're all on this together, and we have Mickey's Miracles, and that's a community. This is a place for families and people who are caretakers of children of medically complex kids dealing with epilepsy, that they can come to, and they know that they're not alone, that there's people out there that love them, that care for them, and that will be there for them as they go through this journey to develop skills and tools to navigate this more easily, if that's, possible. So I want to thank all of you for being on this latest episode. Beyond the Diagnosis is an amazing program that we have to help families navigate and move forward and know what to expect. And for anybody listening in, if there's other topics that we haven't covered thus far that you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. DM us on our social media channels, make mention here. But for today, we thank you so much for joining us. Be healthy and be well.
Thank you so much for sponsoring this series. I think Beyond the Diagnosis will be very, very valuable to families. Is some of it available right now on the
Yes.
web? Great. I know some
You're
families.
on mute, Dario.
Some families are going to be, I know specific families, I'm going to say you need to do this.
Yeah, we'll have this one up in a couple of days, but the first two
Okay.
episodes, and the first two, just as a recap, covered medication measurement and monitoring. And the second one was the social, psycho, neurological impact and how it plays into education with individual education plans, et cetera. And then today, obviously, we're tackling with the big issue of,
yes.
mental health and what parents can expect, what care providers can expect, what caregivers can expect in the administration of support for, children who deserve our very best. And for them to get our very best, we need to be at our very best. And that's going to be different all the time, and that's okay. And that's okay. So I wanted to thank you, Eileen, and obviously Dr. Z, Christy, every time I hear you speak, and we've been doing this together for a while, I have to say that you access a different level of vulnerability and you share something different that I learned from as a dad, that I learned from, that I can apply as we work with families and provide support for our families. So, thank you for, letting yourself be seen. Thank you for sharing the things that you share from the depths of, your goodness, and as a parent who's been in the fight. And, it's such a great example to all of us. And Eileen, I know you could do anything. You're super talented. And the fact that you dedicate your life to helping families cope and support their children in the best way they can, while not losing themselves, is such beautiful work and so meaningful. And Dr. Z, what I think about you. You're just, what you've done, not just for Mickey, but countless other Mickeys, and what you're doing now as a professor of neurology at Wisconsin-Madison. I mean, it's very valuable. And on behalf of the families that we're honored to represent and advocate for, on behalf of our medical advisory board and everyone associated with the Mickey's Miracles community, we thank you sincerely.
I'm going to come find you anytime I'm having a bad day.
No kidding.
You just tell me how good I am and it's going to be fine.
It really will be
I
an
love the work I
uplifting
do. I'm
experience.
really happy to meet all of you and to spend
Yes.
this time with you. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful afternoon.
Be
All
well.
right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.